Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Inside National Security by the network, the National Security Academy. Today, I'm joined with Dexter. Dexter, it's very nice to have you here.
Hi, Cassian. Really happy to be here.
And today, we have a very interesting topic, which I know is very relevant nowadays, which many people are asking, not only Dexter, but many other professionals within government and the national security field, which is the hiring freeze. But as well, what advice would we give to new people entering the field?
Yeah, it's a very unique time in history. Not only do we have this hiring freeze, but then a lot of young folks who had started certain fellowships, who had been accepted in certain internships, those were kind of pulled back. We're also seeing, government getting smaller. They're trying to downsize and reorganize certain agencies, especially in the national security community. So it's pretty an intense time for folks that are looking to get started. You're going to have a lot of folks who have, some 10, 15 years experience that are going to be leaving government, looking for opportunities in the private sector on Capitol Hill, at think tanks. At the same time, you're going to have recent college graduates hoping to get an internship, hoping these fellowship programs start back up. Um, and a lot of folks really kind of come to me and they say, what should I do? Like, what should I do? I'm graduating this year. I plan to graduate in a year, or I just graduated last year. I'm just not sure. And, I think there's a lot of stuff that you can control, which is yourself. When I say control yourself, that means, where can you volunteer? Where can you learn more about people and the things you want to do professionally? What associations are out there? They're still meeting. There's all kind of affinity associations out there for a variety of different issues, whether it's cybersecurity or you know um, diplomacy. I mean, you name it. There's literally a group out there that can kind of be a family for folks that are in that hibernation mode, waiting to kind of get started in some of these areas. There's a lot of different free seminars. Things are hybrid now. They're online and in person. The Spy Museum is doing a lot. A variety of think tanks are doing a lot. I literally talk to probably five or six people a week, just about this in particular. Some folks are weighing things like the Peace Corps. Hey, I got an offer from the Peace Corps. I had one young lady who had this 2-year offer from the Peace Corps to go serve in the Dominican Republic. And I said, go do that. That's great. Not only do you get to improve your language skills, you're
Right.
helping out, you're traveling internationally. It's not too far away. And it all kind of adds to your credibility. A lot of things also depend on where you want to go when you do start the government career, because, certain intelligence agencies typically won't hire somebody who does something like the Peace Corps because they don't want those lines ever blurred. You know,
Right.
is this Peace Corps person really an intelligence asset, or are they just really a Peace Corps volunteer? Well, they've done a pretty good job of making sure that the Peace Corps volunteers are not intelligent assets. So that's something you should look at if you're ever looking to get into the intelligence world. I'm a huge fan of the military. I got my start in the military. My dad was in the military. My sister, my brother, all in the military, different branches. It doesn't matter which branch you kind of join. What you are going to get out of the military is training for whatever job. That job can be flying an airplane. It could be fixing an airplane. It could be being a law enforcement officer. It could be driving a ship. You never know. And there's a lot of opportunities. Every opportunity that's in the civilian world is really in the military as well. They need doctors, lawyers. They need, mechanics, firefighters, you name it. You get those jobs, you get trained in it, you get to travel, see the world, and normally you get some benefits like, you don't have to pay as much when you buy your first house. You don't have to have that down payment, which is normally 20 or 25%. That's covered for you when you have a VA loan. If you're getting education, um, that school is typically covered for you. So whether it's you or somebody in your family, you can use that that GI Bill, as they used to call it, to kind of cover undergrad or graduate expenses. So it's pretty cool. There's a lot of opportunities there. Plus, you get the street cred. It's on your resume forever, and you're serving something. You're going places where people haven't been before, or at least a lot of people haven't been before. So there's so many options out there. As long as folks don't get that kind of narrow vision where they're completely stuck on just this is my only path. Because when you're first starting out, you're learning so much that everything really works.
Dexter, I very much like that, especially looking at it so holistically. And I think young people definitely need to know that, okay, even though they're fixed on doing a certain thing in their future, sometimes it's not a straight line, right? And you were the example, like you went to the military, right? Then after you worked at a think tank for some time, right? And then you slowly got into it through different branches and different agencies, etc. And even what you mentioned, Peace Corps, all these different organizations, they bring something to the table, which is interesting, one should analyze. And talking about the military, I 100% agree with you. I think especially nowadays, maybe within our field, within the field of national security, it's popular. But I think for the general public, many young people might have forgotten about actually, seeing the military as something they can do after high school or maybe after university, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it can show you so much, right? For some, it might be discipline, which definitely gets shown, cleanliness and organization, but then as well those hard skills. But of course, the soft skills that come with it as well. Engineering, right? You mentioned flying a plane. I know many people want to become pilots, and then they use basically joining the Air Force to, be able to fly a plane, make their dreams come true. And so I think that's a very good thing, and I think many young people can definitely take something of value from that.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I was looking at some pictures the other day, and it was me in high school, and my son who's 9 was like, "That is not you," and it was before the military got a hold of me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was. You have a certain level of organization and discipline, of just kind of sucking it up factor. We all know life's not fair, and I think that how you react in those times really kind of defines who you are as a person. I think the military really, really helps you understand what your boundaries are, what your limits are, and what your tolerances are. You can do a lot more than you think. And as you go through this, and you're becoming shipmates in the Navy, or whatever they call it in the Air Force, Marines in the Marine Corps. Your buddies are there with you. You're growing together. You're depending on each other, and you're going through the thick and thin of it. So I'm a huge fan of the military. Can't say enough.
And then I think this week, I mean, we're filming this during the Memorial Week, right? Especially the weekend now has passed, says Memorial Day, the 26th, right? And so many people now, of course, remember about, of course, the great service that many people did. You included, Dexter, for the nation, but then as well for your brothers, right? The brothers are the ones that you serve with, and then in the end, those are the people that you stick with together. You mentioned the thing of joining, let's say, the military, going down that path, it can show you can do much more than you thought, but you can do so together, right? Maybe alone it'd be hard, but together you.
Absolutely, absolutely. They say if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And then that's really important. Um, I look at going through flight training, even basic boot camp, going through survive, evade, resist, escape, SEER training, where you're treated like a prisoner of war, being there with your brothers and your sisters that you went through training with, who and kind of, just looking after each other, not just, you just trying to see who's the toughest, who's the best, but really kind of checking in with each other, being that human, that goes a long way. Um, when things hit the fan, you have what we call the fog of war. So you have all these plans, right? You might have military plans of action. You might have, all kind of capabilities that you're bringing to bear in a certain situation. But once that fog of war kicks in, things become a little unclear. The best laid plans start to unfold a little bit. And that's where relying on your people really matters. That's where relying on yourself, your training, And those relationships really matter. The trust comes into that point, which really comes down to life or death so many different times. And you're right. Today being Memorial Day, you think of all those brave men and women who've made the ultimate sacrifice, whether it was in the military or the intelligence community or the aid and development community, you name it. There's so many people that have gone before us to give us the freedoms and the privileges that we have, whether it's taking a knee to protest or marching, peacefully in a parade, whatever it may be. These people fought for our freedom so that we can do that, and we shouldn't take those things for granted.
Definitely, Dexter. Definitely. When you just mentioned that, it made me think back to this very famous saying of John F. Kennedy when he went to Berlin during, of course, when there was, I think it was during the Cold War, and of course there was the Berlin Wall, etc. And then he said that great thing of "Ich bin ein Berliner" in German, which is I'm a Berliner, right? And basically that being the symbol of I understand you, we fight with you, and then in the end, as it's now, people live in freedom, right? And this is something that people have to value. It doesn't come cheap, right? And it comes with the ultimate sacrifice and constant sacrifice as well by just normal people, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes people get caught up in it's easy to take things for granted. They see something on the internet and they try to compare their life to it. I tell my boys all the time, your life is just fine. You don't need to be
Right.
in competition with anybody else. But then you also see a lot of injustice around the world, right? Things that just aren't right. People, little kids dying of starvation, wars happening, innocent lives lost. It breaks my heart. It's very tragic. As a professional in this community, when I have the option to watch some of these videos, I don't anymore because I have kids and I don't need to physically see these videos to understand the horrific acts that they show. I used to watch them, when before I had families, and it resonated differently with me at that point in time. But yeah, I think we have to really kind of understand that we're blessed, that we are never going to be perfect as individuals or as a country, but what we're doing, hopefully, as individuals, contributes to the greater good for what the country's doing.
Definitely, Dexter. And I think that's exactly what we're doing here, right, with the organization. For the people that don't know, again, the network, trying to educate the next generation about national security and the current one as well. I think as well, living in the US as well, people can take it for granted. I've traveled a lot, like you have, Dexter, and you've noticed within families, especially with the scarce resources, right? They will say, we fight for education. Education is the main focus, and it's such a gift. And people obviously take it for granted as it's so common, you see it everywhere. But no, there's some which still sit on the ground when they go to school, right? They fight for being able to attend school, no work, and this is in many countries, I would say, yeah, more than people would generally think. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. And if we can just slightly go back to the hiring freeze, right? Do you think that potentially there might be, from a just macro scale, there might be some benefits of first, there's this term thrown around like cutting some of the fats, right? Which is basically creating more efficient organizations as a whole. Do you think there is a use of this? And then my next question would be, as we probably have seen, there might be some downsides to that as well, right?
Yeah, I think that this is, again, a really unique time because things haven't changed in my lifetime. So I think change can be good. I do. I think that we don't want people to feel pain and we don't want people to suffer, though, through that change. So I think it needs to be a coordinated and thought out kind of change for it to be most effective. But but I give credit, that change is going to happen. And when that happens, there is opportunity still. There's going to be a big gap in between the folks that are graduating grad school and undergrad in the next 2 years. That normal influx of folks coming into government is going to be missing for the most part. So whatever experience you can get, again, writing, getting published, learning languages, working at a think tank, volunteering, those things are really going to matter. Um, I worked at McDonald's. I was a server at a restaurant called Bennigan's. I did that stuff in college. I worked at 7-Eleven when I was in high school. I wasn't always flying airplanes and stopping terrorists. We all have to live and we all have to survive. So whatever you have to do, there's no shame in that. Hopefully we get back to where we need to be soon, where we have internships that allow people that can't normally afford to move to a place like Washington, D.C., the opportunities to be here. Those are some of the, I think, achievements of the last few years that have really kind of helped a more variety of folks come and participate in this process that we have.
Remember, Dexter, you mentioned this to the group, and I think you say this constantly to many young people about if it's through embassies or different governmental institutions, the fact that one can travel to, let's say, Fiji, right, being one of the destinations we know about, or other destinations which are pretty much around the world. I mean, there's a saying when I went to South America, which someone told me, which is funny, a bit controversial, which is that there's actually in their country four branches of government, they say. So you have the judicial, the executive, the legislative, and the the American government. And so it's especially maybe in the developing world, it's of course very present, right? And to a large degree, positively so, right? Through giving away, maybe helping people through acquiring new languages, developing them further, showing them different cultures. And as you mentioned, this is maybe why the US was always had that advantage, right? Because they were everywhere and they were able to bring the best education to the people.
Yeah, I think it's we've traditionally played that role. It'll be interesting to see what happens with some of the resources that was going to USAID previously. But I was talking to a father recently, a gentleman who was in DC visiting, and he pulled me aside to ask some questions, just to, you know, my thoughts on some things. And it's interesting. We are so protected sometimes as a country living in the United States. We will think that the world thinks like we should, or like we do, which it really doesn't. We have this luxury of being somewhat complacent sometimes. Our guards are down. I'm not saying we should be super uptight, but for the most part, folks can go to the grocery store and get food, and they can travel as they want to, and they're being educated. But what he was talking about, I had to kind of put him in check for a second and say, you're really looking at this from an extreme American angle. I said, what you might see as extreme, others probably wouldn't see as extreme. So take your view, shift it over a couple places, and that's kind of the mean. That's where you want to be. Right now, you're kind of starting off on this extreme angle. And I think he kind of got it. We were talking about certain news sources, for instance, and in his mind, Al Jazeera news source was just, hey, they get terrorist information, so they're there. And I said, they're a credible news source in the Middle East, and a lot of folks listen to them, from Jordanians to Moroccans to Iraqis. And he was like, I kind of understand where you're coming from now. I said, you got to understand so much of these really complicated issues. I mean, it's not just Sunni Shiite, it's everything from food to culture to religion to family, history, locality, all those things matter.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, if we even look at history again, with the Russians, I remember during the Soviet Union as well. And I think it was during the President Yeltsin. where I think he came to the United States of America and they brought him to a grocery store and they showed him like the five different types of bananas and all the different things, obviously with the saturated colors, and it's crazy for a person, right? And then he saw that, and I think there was a quote, famous quote by him, but basically saying that if people during in my home country would see that food is so accessible and it's so vast and so yeah every day, then there might be a revolution, right? Or there might be a strong pushback. And so some people can obviously be in their bubble. Maybe back in the day it was geographically, but sometimes it can also be through maybe not going and experimenting. So that's why it's very important to travel, right? Like you mentioned, use those opportunities to volunteer and take those opportunities. Maybe other institutions, which now might be more in focus due to the hiring freeze, right?
Yeah, yeah. And something else that I always want to say to young people is look at people who are where you want to be
Right.
and figure out what kind of gaps you have in your career. For me, at one point, it was publishing, and now I have two books coming out next month. One on the history of spying called Spy Archives, and the other one that's on national security careers. But this is an opportunity you have to kind of take advantage of those pieces that may be gaps in your current resume or CV and just kind of make it that much stronger. I think that's super important.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Dexter. I thought we had a very good conversation today, and I thank everyone for listening.
Thank you, Cassian. Really, really appreciate it.